Hi, my name is Dave Watson. I am the Director of Engineering and QA for AlphaWire, and today what we wanted to talk about for just a few minutes is how to properly inspect our fit heat shrink tubing. This is an area where we get a lot of phone calls and emails, and sometimes there's some confusion on the proper way to do it. So today I just wanted to briefly demonstrate the proper way. This is a piece of 1-inch heat shrinkable tubing. This is our fit 2-to-1 product, so it reduces to a ratio of 2 to 1. So when fully recovered, it will be less than 1/2 inch in diameter. And I guess that's the first question we get really comes into the dimensioning, because the specifications are what we call single-ended. The ID is a minimum supplied ID. Basically, what that means is it has to be no smaller than the certain value that we specify, because we know that the end user is trying to slide it over something. So if it's too small as it's supplied, then it won't fit over whatever they're applying it over. Then we talk about the recovered ID. When the tubing is fully shrunk, we call it recovered, and we certainly want it to recover at least to the point that we specify, so that is a maximum dimension. There's no plus or minus, it's a min as supplied and a max as recovered. The mistake that people tend to want to make, and not all tubing comes out this flat. This is, as I said, a 1-inch tubing, and just by the nature of the process, it kind of flattens out when we put it on the spool. The smaller sizes tend to be much more round, but either way, what people tend to want to do is to take calipers and kind of try to get it as round as possible, and then come up with a dimension, and it expands, and you can't do it. Or another thing that people try to do sometimes is to well, if it's flat, I might as well make it all the way flat and get a reading, and then, okay, the circumference of a circle is, and try to work it out that way. That technique does not work either. The only acceptable way to measure the diameter of these tubings is with gauge pins. This is a 1-inch gauge pin, and our spec on this is a 1-inch supplied ID minimum. So simply, the pin easily slides in the product, so this passes the requirement of having a minimum supplied diameter of 1.00 inches. Now, the next part is the recovered diameter. So here I have a heat shrink gun. I am going to fully shrink one end of this. And when you're shrinking heat shrink product, what is key is to keep varying where the heat's going so it shrinks uniformly. Now, as it starts to shrink, I'm going to walk the heat gun toward the end of the tubing. So I just continue to walk it toward the end, and eventually it's going to start to get nice and round for me. Okay. One of the things we want to do is make sure that it's fully recovered. Obviously, if it's not fully recovered, it won't be down to the proper size. So that looks pretty fully recovered. The next thing I'm going to do is be patient, because one thing about heat shrinkable tubing, these polyolefin materials retain a great deal of heat. So right now, it's pretty doggone hot, and out of concern for my fingers, I want to make sure that it cools off pretty well. And you notice that if you're new to heat shrinkable tubing, that even though this has a pretty significant crease in it, when you look at the fully recovered tubing, that all goes away. So this isn't any sort of quality concern. That's just the nature of the process. And yet when you're done, you get a nice round uniform finish, and there's no evidence of that crease. So here we have a 1/2 inch gauge block, 0.500 inches. These are calibrated and traceable. And you can see it will not fit in. If we had a an infinite variety of these gauge pins. Every mill or whatever, we could see, what the actual diameter is, but that's really not important because the spec is 0.5 inches recovered ID maximum, and since this half-inch pin won't fit, we know that it's shrunk beyond the half-inch, so it's in spec. So briefly, that was how to do a receiving inspection on fit heat shrink-able tubing. And as always, I thank you for your attention, and should you have any questions, please send them to info@alphawire.com. Thank you.